Hi, everyone. I continue to see folks joining, so we'll give it a minute, but I did want to open up and say thank you for everyone joining us today. I've really been looking forward to this webinar and discussing a topic that I believe is so prevalent for many. But before we begin, I did want to let everybody know that today's session will be recorded and shared out via email. So you have the ability to rewatch it later, maybe this weekend during family movie night or whenever. Furthermore, we will also host a Q&A at the end of this presentation. So please feel free to use the Zoom control panel at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions at any time. I'll be sure to capture those and we'll address those at the end of the presentation. Perfect. So just by way of quick introductions, my name is Michael Glosser, and I have the privilege of representing Siemplify in support of our global service provider businesses. I'm joined today by one of our most senior solution architects, Daniel DeSarens, and a couple of brilliant minds from Stage 2 Security, Bryce Kuntz and Jake Groth. And then touching on the agenda quickly, I'd really like to see us spending most of the time today diving into the topic at hand, along with a live demo. But for those that may be less familiar, I wanted to open up with a little bit about who we are and bring to light some of the challenges you may be staring down at your organization today. At Siemplify, we like to say that we were born within the SOC world. All of our founders share a background in cyber defense. They were running cyber operation centers for the Israeli Defense Force before being contracted to build out cyber ranges around the world. And these experiences have really given us a unique perspective of the challenges facing the SOC and have embedded the security know-how into the solution that we deliver. The Siemplify platform was really designed from the ground up to address the full breadth of security operations challenges. And while SOAR is at the heart of what we do, we really go beyond just automation and playbooks to offer a much broader solution that serves as the central workbench for the SOC, and really making it no wonder why we're now the most used SOAR platform within the MSSP market. So, Jake, go back for me one more slide. I want to kind of set the stage for today's discussion, and I'll start by recognizing that security operations to be a very well-established discipline, with many businesses having had SecOps strategies in place for decades. Yet the approach to security operations that many companies take often suffer from several drawbacks. And we find that many security teams rely heavily on disparate tools that are extremely difficult to integrate and manage centrally. And that these tools generate way more alerts than analysts and engineers could ever respond to. We also find that processes remain mostly manual for so many, and even amid a very well-documented global security skills shortage, making it even more challenging to rise above all of the firefighting to track KPIs and drive improvement, right? And the coronavirus pandemic has really only exacerbated these challenges with the global shift to remote work. And we're witnessing a surge in cloud demand, I think in consequence of the COVID-19 crisis, likely due to the rapid adoption of online collaboration tools. And with this new wave of cloud adoption comes more cloud misconfiguration risks and more opportunities for malicious actors to exploit. And while cloud misconfiguration is a preventative problem, it remains the #1 cause of cloud-based data breaches. And I really found these figures interesting. So here on the slide are key findings from a State of Cloud Security survey published, it was only just a couple months ago, where it said 96% of cloud engineering teams are now 100% distributed and working from home. and that 92% are worried that their organizations are now even more vulnerable to a significant cloud misconfiguration related data breach. And that 28% stated that they've already suffered a critical breach. And that 33% believed that cloud misconfigurations will only increase as a result. So one critical security metric that every CISO and really anybody with cloud security responsibility should know is mean time to remediation, or MTTR. And this is the time elapsed between an incident, in this case, misconfiguration first occurs, and then when it's remediated. And we're seeing that it's not uncommon for MTTR to be measured in days, weeks, or even months. And that's a massive data breach waiting to happen. Time delays are the biggest threat to cloud infrastructure, and the longer misconfiguration is left undetected or not corrected, the higher the risk for a major security breach. But we have good news, right? And in this webinar, our friends from Stage 2 Security will walk us through an approach for automated remediation methods for cloud misconfiguration, leveraging the full power of Siemplify platform. So hopefully you can walk away with just a way to better identify some of these problems and have a solution to implement, corrections immediately. So without further ado, please let me hand this over to Jake Groth, the CTO of Stage 2 Security.
All right, thank you, Michael. I think it's important to set the table here on a little bit about what stage, a little bit about the company Stage 2 and what we're really focused on. So, and that kind of goes back to our origin story. Bryce Coons and some other NSA operators left and kind of struck it out on their own to be able to take their lessons they learned from being, our country's, best allies and adversaries across overseas to be able to really try to create a really best of breed adversary simulation service. So they started off doing a lot of penetration tests, red team, purple teams, exploit research, that kind of thing. And as they, continue to do great work, they pivoted into more than just that service. And they created the adversary prevention lines, which are security engineering architecture, traditional stuff like incident response, security monitoring. And that's a lot of the on-premise delivery we do for our large customers today. Luckily, they did that so they could bring somebody like me over, and I've been thrilled to be able to join the team here. Together, we kind of created this managed protection line, which is basically the industrialized version of these assets. And that's predominantly what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about our SMITE, Managed Detection Response capability. And we also have Vulnerability Management as a service that we're not going to talk about today, but we do have that as far as managed protection. And then Bryce is going to be talking about our Mage platform, which is really our pen test, red team as a service, and a continuous attack surface management. So together, I kind of run our defensive assets, and Bryce runs our offensive assets. And together, we kind of have this. We've known each other since college, great friends. We like to have this kind of semi-competitive steel on steel type approach to making sure that I'm always catching what he's doing and vice versa. So anyway, with that said, I'll turn it over to Bryce, and he can kind of talk about the asset he created called Mage.
Hey everybody, I'm Bryce. Yeah, so we're doing a lot of pen tests, and a lot of these pen tests and red team engagements were really focused on tech companies, whether they're large tech companies or they are startups. And as you guys all are probably aware and acquainted with, a lot of the tech companies are heavily utilizing cloud providers such as AWS and Azure and GCP. And a lot of the environments we go in and test, all the protection or data they really wanted to protect were inside these cloud providers. And then all the endpoints that, the developers and engineers were using were MacBooks and things like that. So we would come in and we do like a red team or pen test, and, we do a great job and, help the clients kind of secure their infrastructure, but, and then they kind of say goodbye to us and see us next year, right? So we really wanted to do more. We wanted to have a way where the client could be continuously testing their assets and the resources they're creating in the cloud providers, You know, kind of like a continuous automated, you know, pen test light, right? And so that's why we built the Mage platform, really to keep up with the DevOps culture. You know, a lot of these teams are doing agile development. You know, they're pushing out new code, you know, 2 weeks or less. And Mage can really run continuously, check their infrastructure every day, both at the cloud and external and internal layers for what things we call imminent risks, which are basically like, you know, critical risks you probably should never accept. So that's kind of the inspiration for Mage and what the platform does. Yeah, so I think, yeah, that's kind of the background on that. So, and why we created the platform. So there you go. Hand it over to Jake to talk more about SMITE.
So just like Bryce was talking about, you know, Bryce and I are both, you know, practitioners. We're in the front lines, and he created the Mage asset to be able to address the weaknesses that he was seeing in the kind of the delivery model of how people are doing pen testing, kind of like a snapshot in time. Where I kind of took the same approach to our match detection response. I have a lot of experience in not just managed services, but managed detection response itself. I've created some in prior companies, and you know, I really this time around wanted to take all of that experience and really focus on what I could do differently to be able to provide unique value this time around. And the three major takeaways I had from that experience was to be able to focus on what we're uniquely good at, what things that S2 is uniquely good at, and then white label the rest, right? It doesn't make sense to reinvent the wheel, have other technology providers and every content providers do what they're good at and package them together. Second thing was to really pick a flexible architecture. In the past, before technology had caught up, flexible really kind of meant, you know, a really poor performance, a really poor delivery model, because, you know, your operating model would not be standardized. And so you couldn't really guarantee performance because you took every customer's, you know, every customer's requirements and tried to make it work. And it was really hard to have any kind of consistent service there. Which is why standardization is so powerful. I mean, Henry Ford had a really great saying, you know, you can have any color as long as it's black when it comes to Model T. And that's kind of the approach I took with prior versions of this. And I found that, you know, you really limit your addressable market. And also you can really, you know, a lot of customers have a lot of different use cases, and it felt kind of like a square peg, a round hole a lot. So flexible architecture was definitely something that I want to take in consideration this time. And the last thing, so the first two things I'll talk about next. This last thing is on scalability, being able to scale the asset without having to have a lot of complexity in the configuration. So with that, both Mage and SMITE use a microservices approach. Everything is highly cohesive and loosely coupled, so we can remove different parts of the reference architecture and really be able to scale out based on the demand of the data as well as the performance. So how we do that, according to this slide, is that, you know, you have your traditional endpoint products or your traditional LAN environments, you have your cloud environments, you have your containers, your, you know, your function as a service, backend as a service, you know, all the newfangled things, cloud native stuff. You have all these different things. And I slurp up the digital exhaust from all those different environments. I drop into our data lake where we relentlessly mine using the API, relentlessly mine for detections. What I mean by detections, I don't mean atomic indicators of compromise, which are important. Things like IP addresses and hashes are all very important, but that doesn't get the adversarial tools, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs, which is what I said we really focus on. So to be able to do that, you have to create these complex queries, behavioral queries. And so we procure a lot of crowdsourced threat detections, as well as build our own. Like today's use case, we built our own. And together you can really hit economies of scale and focus what you're uniquely good at. So we relentlessly mine, using this microservices approach, the customer's data, refining it, and using the Siemplify platform, when there's a match, we refine the alert, assign it to a case, and then we respond to those intrusions, either, you know, typically using customer approval through the customer portal to be able to remediate the intrusion at the offending endpoint. The great thing about Siemplify is that it uses a, you know, container for its response agent. So all the communications are inside out. So you don't have to have all these kludgy VPNs trying to maintain all these different customers. So moving on to what I said was one of the big takeaways, was to be detection led, or to focus on what you're really good at. So for those familiar or in the industry, this is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This is actually one of the products that we use to be able to grab that, like I said, crowdsourced threat intelligence, where we have thousands of detections in the form of queries mapped against the MITRE ATT&CK framework looking for those, as well as us constantly building those detections. And we're going to use that as a backdrop in today's use case as well. So everything we do with is detection at the center. We get the data and we respond to it based on the detection being at the center. And if you're using somebody that just tries to hire as many hunters for their staff as possible, they're just never going to be able to get out above the skis. And also they're going to be very expensive trying to maintain this detection library. So this slide discusses the main reason why we pick Siemplify out of all the other SOAR providers out there. And that is extremely flexible in its delivery model, while I can still maintain consistent performance in my operating model. So let's say that customer B right there has, QRadar or Splunk or anything else on-prem. They've had a lot of investment in that, and they want to continue to use their on-premise environment, but they want us to be able to still have our detections as well as our response playbooks and our service for monitoring that, either on nights and weekends or full 24/7. It doesn't matter. We can deploy through that microservices approach. We can deploy our detections all the way down to their workload, and then slurp up all those alerts as they come back and still assign it the same way. To our analysts, it will look the same as if we were hosting it or if it's on customer on-prem SIEM. And that's the same thing if like customer C has a workload in the cloud and they want us to monitor just the cloud portion of it. We can still deploy our detections that are relevant to the cloud and then slurp those back into the same platform and also respond to those the same. So with that said, kind of setting the table with our two assets, Mage and SMITE, we're gonna use the threat actor Magecart simply because A, it sounds cool because it's Mage versus Magecart, but also it's a really good use case to kind of show the this kind of automated techniques our attackers are using. So with that said, I'm going to hand it over to Bryce to kind of set the stage for the Magecart actor.
Right. So Magecart. This is really where actors, they are trying to modify or append JavaScript into shopping cart or e-commerce software on various websites, and usually with the intention of collecting credit card data out of production e-commerce websites, but sometimes for just general malvertising type attacks as well. And while there's several groups out there that are kind of all operating with the same malware or same goal, which is to collect credit card data, generally speaking, several of these groups have gotten pretty creative in their way to get this malicious JavaScript out there to the masses. And one particular scenario that was of interest is, one day a group of hackers, they woke up and they thought to themselves, how do I get this out to more users faster, quicker, better? And they realized a lot of people are putting their static resources like JavaScript inside of S3 buckets, storage accounts used inside of their cloud providers, S3s for AWS, but GCP and Azure have similar type services and concepts. And so what they did is they scanned and they found as many S3 buckets as they could. And then they looked inside those buckets and they tried to find as many JavaScript files as they possibly could. And then on all the JavaScript files they found where they had permissions or rights to do so, they modified the JavaScript and they appended their malicious JavaScript at the bottom of it that would collect credit card data. And in this way, they compromised over 17,000 domains just by finding these misconfigured S3 buckets and modifying the JavaScript files in them. And some of those include websites that are in the top 2,000 of the Alexa rank of websites around the world. So this is a highly successful attack. It's not crazy sophisticated, but it was successful because they thought outside the box and they thought, let's look at the cloud and how things are frequently misconfigured there. So, ongoing attackers, and they're always trying to come up with new and creative ways to get their malicious code out there. So
let's take this. I'm gonna kind of use this backdrop here and kind of to summarize. These guys sprayed and prayed looking for writable S3 buckets, which are basically just like storage accounts in the cloud, right? And you're not supposed to be able to write, especially if you're processing credit card data, you're not supposed to be able to write to these S3 buckets in AWS. And so they had these automated techniques where they were just saying, hit the internet. So that's a really good use case for something like continuous attack surface management, like what Mage is supposed to do, because it's a common misconfiguration that could have dramatic impact to your organization. And we find this frequently. Frequently is one of our top findings. So this is not some fringe use case. And even this week, I saw in my news feed, Magecart, continues to be able to, again, they've pivoted a little bit to more of the malvertising thing, malicious redirecting type stuff, but it is very active still. So I'm going to kind of, before we get to the live demo portions of this, I kind of wanted to talk about how to really kind of prove out our detection-led model. The kind of guiding principles for creating good detection is to be able to model what good behavior or good, what good behavior looks like versus what bad behavior looks like, or anomalous behavior. So a lot of people, there's a lot of legitimate reasons why you would be making changes to your JavaScript file in an application. Because, in this new world order of DevOps, DevSecOps, CI/CD pipeline, all that stuff, people are pushing out code through the pipeline constantly. And changes are happening very, very, very quickly. And all these kind of dynamic environments can really exacerbate this misconfiguration problem. But anyway, let's say that in this case, the username is Jason Bertman. A lot of times you'll see, or Jay Bertman, a lot of times you'll see, Jenkins or something else in the pipeline pushing out, using this IAM role. So if you're looking at it's important to have domain expertise in these CloudTrail logs, but if you're looking at the user identity, you see type IAM user. What that means is basically you're an internal authenticated user. And there are other types of types that would be appropriate, but in general, you can see the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right. The one on the right is from an external AWS account. And AWS account is like the most basic account that you would have. So looking at these logs, this one has obviously, you can see it has an IP address in there. It has the event name, which is the activity, which is put object, meaning somebody wrote something to that S3 bucket, and they did it from an external account. I can't think of any valid reason why you'd be adjusting, you'd be putting objects or uploading files to an S3 bucket from an external account if you're processing credit card data. So you can clearly see that there's some malicious behavior here. It's missing key fields, as well as, it's good to take note that it has an IP address it could use further in a playbook for alert refinement. So we take those two logs, and then we say, okay, let's actually map a detection out of this. Sigma is a SIM agnostic schema that you can use, that we use, that is able to, that's how we're able to kind of be agnostic to what SIM provider you have, is that we can still create the same detection no matter what, normalize it no matter what SIM you're using. And that's what it's on the left. But if you're familiar with Elastic or Splunk, we kind of broke those out into what they would interpret that to be. So Elastic DSL obviously says, hey, for the event type, or for the data source of CloudTrail, the activity is somebody placed or uploaded a file to our source, as well as from an external account. Or in Splunk, that SPL there is, again, source type CloudTrail log, same activity, somebody did a put object from an external account. Now, conversely, you could make this detection where you're white labeling the accounts. It all depends on what your organization usually does. So if your organization usually uses these federated accounts or assumed roles or whatever it is, that's the activity, that's behavior you're whitelist, and you say flag on everything else. All right, so now that we've kind of, peeled that back to the onion so we can understand what we're looking at, we filmed this. We actually ran this attack against a real database environment. We filmed this using Mage. I'm going to do a live demo what the events look like from the Siemplify side, but I'm going to go ahead and play the video of us actually running the simulation. And with that, I'm also going to turn it over to Bryce to editorialize that.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Jake. So, Mage, it's really designed to be continuously running. So it can run every day, and, you can set up your kind of like a cron job or a timer on how frequently you want it to run. So it's meant to kind of fill the gap between our pen testing engagements for our clients as kind of like a value added for continuous monitoring and specifically of attack surface. So this is kind of what it looks like when you log in. You get a portal, and it kind of gives you a little bit of a risk rating based off the previous scans it's done. It also does some trending of the data. So if you leave it running with its defaults, which is checking every day, then it's gonna give you some trending data, and as it finds less and less critical findings, it will trend you upwards. There's different types, albeit right here we're just kind of looking at the cloud and external type. So we can just go in and add in credentials for AWS, Azure, or GCP, and use these credentials to kick off the assessment. And if you leave the checkbox checked, which you see here, it will enumerate the policies and configuration of the cloud account, and then it will also go in and look at the resources. And specifically, it will do quite a bit of checks against the resources, what they have facing the internet, to make sure there's nothing egregiously insecure there. Tries to give you some like visualizations of that data, and as well as some rankings when the assessment finishes. There's a nice little checkbox that lets you compare the assessments from this one to the assessments previous. So you can kind of see if you have more findings or less findings than when it ran last time. And it's really trying to focus on those things that are just what we call imminent risk. They're really critical vulnerabilities that need to be addressed as soon as possible. So you can see here that it found one critical, and in this case, that's that S3 bucket that we've been talking about today. I mean, this is an S3 bucket that's publicly accessible, anyone on the internet can get to, and there's write access enabled on it. So I was able to easily find that and test it, and alert us that, hey, an attacker could come in here and modify files that are in it, including a JavaScript file that's hosted inside of it, which is, the Magecart actors would add in the Magecart JavaScript malware to start skimming credit cards or do malvertising or whatever at this point. But, thankfully, you can see Mage would proactively find that for you on a continuous basis, and then SMITE would, Jake's going to demo how SMITE would actively detect that for you.
Thanks, Bryce. Well, the reality is we filmed that for the sake of time. We're going to all remember that I'm braver than Bryce because I'm going to be doing a live demo versus a video demo. So with that said, I'm sure this is going to crash and burn. No, just kidding. All right, so looking at this, so this is what it would look like if we're the analysts inside of our SMITE platform using Siemplify. So you can see there's other kind of cases that come in. And again, to an analyst, whether or not it was coming in from our cloud environment or from an on-premise environment or through our hosted environment that I walked through, to them it will look the same. So it all kind of comes through this standardized operating model. So looking at this is the put object. This is the detection that we wrote, and this is it being fired. In this case, it was fired in our Elastic-SIEM that grabbed it, pulled it over into this, and Siemplify slurped it up. So we're going to kind of pretend to be an analyst here and kind of look through what this would look like on the defensive side. So this thing came in, put object, you're looking at this going, okay, come over, it's asked me a question. File reputation is not known. Do you want to proceed with locking the file anyway? And if this was a real demo or real use case, there'd also be a wiki article that would explain basically what this put object detection did, the documentation of what conditions would fire and what to look for to help the analyst be able to make sure that they are seeing this correctly. But we're kind of gonna look at it live here. So looking at this, we're gonna go, okay, looking at the events, I would come through here, if I was the analyst, I would grab this, I'd look at these events and say, okay, this is coming from an external account. That's not great. I come over here and I maybe say, let's explore and take a look at what this looks like. And you can see that this account, this external account from this IP address did this action put object against this JavaScript file, and this is our AWS account. So obviously the behavior of this, even though the activity or the file wasn't known to be malicious, this one, the activity is not great. It's going to be malicious. So coming back over here, like, okay, I think I know enough, and I come over here, click on the playbook. It says, the file reputation unknown. Do you want to proceed with locking the file anyway? I would know enough to be able to say, okay, let's go ahead and block this. But let's go ahead and look at the playbook and see what else, what kind of decisions were made here to really kind of let this use case breathe. Notice these insights came in. You can see here that through this playbook, which I'll show in a second, it actually reaches back out using the Elastic API and pulls the surrounding events surrounding the detection. So our put object was the behavior that we fired on. from external account, you can see clear reconnaissance activity here. List objects, head objects, get objects, and then put the object back and change, and then that's what the put object is, and then put the object back and change the permissions of it. So this is showing clear recon activity where it finds, just like Magecart would find this out in the open, grab the JavaScript, adjust the JavaScript, and put it back. This here shows the hash of the JavaScript file they put back. Now, how did it get the hash? It wasn't in the event itself. That's where we go to the playbook. So going over to the playbook section here, this is what the playbook looks like. You start the detection kicks off this trigger, right? This is where it reached back into the Elastic API and pulled the surrounding events from the detection. It added it to the insight board, which we already looked at. Then it has this AWS get data where it actually reaches out based on the event information and goes out and actually pulls the data, the JavaScript down and is gonna hash it. Then it has this kind of what's called an enrichment block. The cool thing about using playbooks is it's all about object reuse. This playbook was not designed for Magecart. This playbook was designed around the malicious behavior of somebody putting something in your S3 bucket. And this enrichment nested playbook or block is there to be able, that can be used to refine any alert. And we reuse this constantly. So this basically shows that it pulls the hash down and the IP address and URL, anything else associated that it can find, and it runs it through for these reputation sources. In this case, it's recorded future, virus total. It could be any of your flavors. That's the ones that we like. You throw it through virus total, and then it comes back out and has a decision here. So this enrichment block says, is this suspicious? Now, there's some things that you want to send to an analyst or the customer to approve the response actions or to get some insight in. There's also some things that are so smoking gun that you don't want to pass go, you don't want to collect $200, you want to go directly to remediation. Now, if you, this is very common where, because they know what the Magento software that Bryce talked about was, the credit card software, and they also know what the malicious card skimming code look like, the unique hash of those things, two things together are actually known to threat intelligence. So if you send out the hash and it comes back saying known malicious, then you should not even ask an analyst about it. You should go directly, obviously if customers approve this response action, go directly to locking the file in the bucket. You don't want to have, there's no reason why you'd ever want to be serving up a malicious JavaScript file for credit card processing. So, but that's not the question. If you go back to what this thing is asking us, that's not what it's asking us. It's saying file reputation is not known. Do you want to proceed with locking the file anyway? Now, obviously, this is Mage doing this, and Mage is not going to be uploading malicious files of any kind. Mage is just trying to identify to make sure the vulnerability exists, the world writable S3 bucket. And it mimics some of the TTPs of Magecart, but obviously it's not going to upload malicious content. So that's why the reputation is not known. And also the IP address is going to be valid because we're not going to be coming from a poor reputation source. So, but the behavior here, based on the fact that you see clear recon activity here, it's coming from external account, and the behavior is bad, I would have no problem as an analyst saying, yes, I would like to lock the file anyway. You execute that, says, boom, the file is now locked, and it removes the case from the stack. All right, so that's the end of, luckily the demo went well. That's the end of how we would walk through this sample use case. I'm gonna turn the time over to Bryce now to talk about the Mage side of it, what the finding would look like, and the remediation of this vulnerability.
So yeah, on the Mage side, we kind of saw in the video that a finding would pop up and you can view some more details about it. And you can also like set up email notifications or send this off to Jira or Slack or other systems for notifications. But kind of at a high level, I mean, we can just talk about AWS security, right? A lot of breaches occur every year due to misconfigured storage accounts on cloud providers, such as S3 buckets or, publicly accessible Elasticsearch clusters. Microsoft just had a breach recently because of that. Really you want to be going into your cloud accounts. You want to be reviewing the access controls on AWS. That means, looking at the IAM policies, how those are configured, as well as are there any bucket policies specific on the storage accounts and inside of S3? AWS does have a block public access feature for S3 buckets that should be enabled on any S3 bucket that really doesn't need to have data publicly accessible. I mean, obviously, if you're serving static content like JavaScript files, that probably needs to be publicly accessible. But my recommendation is really to separate your objects into different buckets based off of the access controls that you need there, so that your public stuff is just in the public bucket, and then all your private stuff is in other buckets that are not public at all. And then you can enable logging on your buckets and your storage accounts in general. There's two different ways to do this on AWS. My general recommendation is you want to get the data events because they have a little bit more detail in them. And there's several tools that can help you with securing your AWS accounts. In addition, that are kind of open source, like Cloud Mapper and Prowler and Scout Suite. We cover a lot of the attacking of cloud accounts, as well as the defensive tools in our Black Hat course on red teaming inside of AWS, Azure, and GCP providers. That's quite popular, usually sells out at most of the Black Hat events. In addition, AWS has built a service specifically designed to try and find misconfigurations of S3 accounts, as well as data that shouldn't be in it. The service is called Macie. It's kind of a mixed bag because of some of the limitations on the service, and it may not find everything. Like it may actually not identify this scenario right here, but it does try to use machine learning and pattern matching to let you know if there's things that it sees in your buckets that are public that it thinks it should not be there. But it can be quite costly, and it can also still has some gaps. So really, I think the best thing to do is really, know your cloud environments as well as possible, review the access controls around them, and try and, apply those privileges of least privilege and logging whenever possible.
I like the training plug there, Bryce. I forgot to mention at the top. So I like we do a lot of training, both on demand as well as in a set periodicity. So in both penetration testing and defensive stuff, and like you said about cloud security. So if you have obviously anything like that, training is also something we do that we're really good at.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. For those attending, again, feel free to use the Zoom control panel at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions. I did get a few sent over to me directly, so I'll just start firing away, right? You mentioned a flexible delivery model. Just to confirm, if I wanted you to run SMITE hosted in my on-prem SIM using your detection and response service, you can?
Yeah, so I'll take that. The standard reference architecture is that we would be able to ingest your data, host the data in our data lake, coincidentally using S3, and then we mine that with our detection library in a full turnkey service. But back to what I was talking about, square peg round hole. A lot of times in the past, I found with MDR specifically that the prescriptive tech stack really would struggle with people who have already kind of been doing what they should have in the past and creating a security program, and just couldn't find the labor to really. The content is also super hard to create and to find, and they don't have the labor to integrate it all together, or even to have the domain experts to be able to respond to it. So I wanted to create something where I had one full architecture and they could take out pieces based on what the customer didn't need because of prior investments. And so yes, we can very easily deploy our detections down to your SIM and then slurp up the alerts that come from that. We could also have other managed services like security engineering or incident response, type of services where we can add it into the basket to do a full turnkey solution, or a hybrid approach. Very flexible in how we would do it. Another cool thing about Siemplify, I mentioned it briefly, is that it does have a container for its response engine. So it reaches out to our environment and pulls down the response actions it needs to take. But you're not opening up your boundary to me. That's a lot of problems in the past where people are like, hey, that's great, you can block phishing, but I have to give you access to our Exchange service account to your external party to be able to do that. With Siemplify, I'm able to deploy a response engine into their environment, and it reaches out to me to say what it should do, and then it pulls that down without having me have a VPN or having access to their environment, and it can still negotiate with their Exchange internally. So a long-winded answer is yes. One of the main things I wanted to do here is make sure that there was not a customer that I didn't have an answer for.
No, that's great. And here comes another one. What other types of risks can Mage identify in AWS account?
Oh, I'll take that. Thanks, Michael. So, the things that I've seen recently, like this last week is, you can identify a lot of risks, but, egregious policy misconfigurations like over-provisioned accounts inside of AWS, as well as it does have a capability where it will inspect the user data for EC2 instances, which is kind of like the boot script that is used when an EC2 instance is booting up. And it will look for like hard-coded credentials, like private keys and whatnot inside of that. It also kind of looks at the overall, CloudTrail configurations to see is there a better way to configure that to ensure you're getting the right data being logged, and that's being done everywhere across all the regions in AWS. So those are kind of some of the things that I've seen recently. There is, quite a few checks there, but those are some of the more impactful recent ones I've seen.
Awesome, thanks. Here's another question from the chat. Are there any plans for FedRAMP?
I see that coming from Dave. I've known Dave a long time, and I'm actually going to take that as a compliment that this whole thing he's tried to reach as far back as he could to find a potential weakness. No, so as far as FedRAMP is concerned, I've done it before. It takes some time and some money to be able to pull that off. I am not opposed to getting the service FedRAMPed, but I also made decisions so that I could, meaning everything that we use is not SaaS-based. Everything is hosted in our environment, self-contained inside of our VPC. Nothing, or inside of our services. Nothing is dependent on somebody else to do. And at the moment, most of the customers that are asking us for a FedRAMP for a GovCloud environment, meaning they want to be able to have it run entirely either on their premise or in their cloud, which we can do. In their AWS instance, so it doesn't have to be FedRAMP, but it's still in their AWS instance or their Azure instance or GCP instance. Or they say, as long as it's in GovCloud, we don't care if the actual service is accredited. So the short answer is it's not currently FedRAMPed. We would FedRAMP it if we had a sponsor, but most of our clients only really care about it being either GovCloud or running in their environment.
Great. And you guys talked about cloud native architecture. Does SMITE monitor and respond to cloud native applications like serverless or containers or orchestrators like Docker or Kubernetes?
Yes. So that was one of the use cases that I've seen was kind of interesting, is that this whole rise of cloud native, which a lot of times people think cloud native is, oh, I'm running in AWS or I'm running in GCP. That's not the same thing. This is more of like the new function as a service, Lambda, backend as a service, Docker containers, Kubernetes, all those things. Those are all kind of the new world order of cloud native. And it's really this microservices approach. Not only do we use, the microservices approach and the CI/CD pipeline concepts for both Mage and SMITE, but I also found it as an opportunity for us to kind of be one of the first providers doing security monitoring for these environments. And it's a much different, at first people tried to kind of shoehorn in legacy technologies to be able to monitor these kind of new cloud native applications, and they do not work. So for example, like vulnerability management, we didn't talk about our vulnerability management service, but how you do, image scanning and CAS hardening inside of the CI/CD pipeline is much different than how you would do it for how applications are running today, using, your traditional vulnerability scanners. So the same kind of thing here is that we have created use cases around how we would observe, container, both on the build and runtime, how would we observe what normal behavior looks like, and then also, because everything is running APIs, how would you respond to those type of use cases? So we have a whole context around what modeling around what a Kubernetes cluster or a Docker containers look like and what the applications should look like, and how would we respond to containers that have been compromised at runtime, for example.
Perfect. And are there any limitations to applying the use case with other cloud providers like GCP or Microsoft Azure?
I'll go ahead. I mean, Bryce, you can go ahead and jump on this too. The answer is yes. I think we picked AWS because it has the most users slash, it resonates the most. But the writing this for Cloud Stack or writing this for Azure, there are a little bit of nuance differences, but it's the same activity. That is, you can still misconfigure this specific use case. You can still misconfigure it the same. It just the type of data sources would look different and the syntax would be different. But in general, everything we do is agnostic to whatever cloud provider you're running or whatever technologies you're running. It just is a question of semantics. Bryce, I don't know if you wanted to jump any further on your guys. Obviously, your content has to also be able to be used in other environments as well.
Yeah, I mean, the way you interact with storage on the different cloud providers is slightly different, and also the logs that they produce is slightly different. But I mean, the core concept is the same. You can misconfigure storage accounts on all three providers. Google and AWS have taken steps to try and make their user interfaces more security centric, to make misconfiguring them harder to do. But Azure's taken some good steps with their latest identity management or identity services type solutions, where you can assign roles to the resources or the storage accounts. So I mean, they're all trying to proactively improve security in this area, but so we would have kind of a different module in Mage though that to carry out the attack, right? But the entire Mage platform is microservices approach is 100% serverless, so it's really quick for us to add in additional cloud providers and whatnot, right? Because I know there's some other fringe ones as well, like Alibaba and Oracle, that a few of our clients have been asking about. So we're hoping to roll those in the near future as well too.
No, that's great. How large does Mage scale?
Yeah, so like I was saying, it's 100% serverless, right? It's a microservices approach. So we're really just bound by the limitations of the cloud provider, which it's built on top of AWS, which we have a good relationship with. So there, we've gotten a lot of the defaults raised very high. I mean, we've tested it on accounts that have over 70,000 public-facing EC2 instances, like huge national laboratory type accounts, and been able to check all their infrastructure in less than 24 hours, which enables Mage to do its core job, which is to do the continuous checking, which we kind of define as checking at least once every 24 hours. So yeah, I mean, it's scales really well because it was built that way from the ground up. So
great. And this one's probably more for the Siemplify platform. So I'll ask it, and Daniel, I'll ask you to answer. But if an organization wanted to allow some permissions beyond basic read permissions, does Siemplify offer role-based access control? And another way of asking would be, are there more than admin and read-only access in the platform?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and take that one. So yes, there is more than just read-only and admin. We do have role-based access to where you can start to provide more granular control as to what you can see and do in the platform. So a short answer is yes. That's a little bit more information for you.
Awesome, thanks. I think that concludes the questions that I have. Scrolling back up, and I'll ask this to the stage too, guys. How do you price your service?
Well, there's two assets here, but in general, there are three major categories. It's kind of like a high watermark between the three. So the first one is your traditional endpoints, like unique IPs, host names. And there are bands, they're set bands, 1,000, 5,000, that kind of thing, of how many you kind of fit inside that band of consumption-based pricing, price per endpoint. That's kind of your traditional environments. Then you have like your cloud applications, like if you want us to be monitoring Office 365 accounts or G Suite accounts, then that gets thrown into the mix as a separate bucket. And then the third bucket and final bucket is your resources, which are things more like we're talking about is like Lambda or Kubernetes or Docker. And we're kind of classifying all of that as resources. And so depending on what you're looking at as to monitor, it would kind of get thrown through this calculator and come out to a rough price. But I'll just say this, because we are, you know, we're a niche company focusing on cybersecurity, and we don't have a lot of overhead. We're going to be our service is going to be very price competitive to traditional managed services provider with much more high touch customer involvement. So yeah, I think that if you're interested in pricing, please feel free to contact me, which our contact information is going to be after this. And Bryce is kind of on the similar. Bryce can answer his question on how he does Mage pricing.
Yeah, so with the Mage pricing, if you just want really like the continuous attack service monitoring, that's kind of like a typical SaaS-based approach, like the same way you would pay for like AWS. You get your monthly bill, and it could even feed up to credit card payments, or you can have an enterprise agreement. Either way is fine. A lot of our clients are laying that on top of pen testing services. So it's like kind of our typical pen testing pricing plus the attack service monitoring. And then we have a few clients that are mostly large tech companies where we're kind of doing red teaming as a service on top of the pen testing and attack service monitoring. So those all kind of have different price points depending on what your requirements are. But, at the base, if you just want to get the continuous attack service monitoring, that is kind of like a monthly thing that you can sign up doing credit card processing. Albeit, I'd say most of our clients that are on the platform right now are also using us for our pen testing services. So hopefully that's gives you kind of a rough idea. If you guys have any questions about that stuff, I'll be happy to talk with you more. Feel free to reach out to us. So
awesome. Thanks, guys. And I'll just quickly answer it from the Siemplify side. Our core pricing model is by platform and offers a true starter pack. Really with everything you need to get started. And from there, Siemplify uses a user pricing metric, which is also a good segue to a call to action. So one option you guys may consider is the community edition of our platform. So this is our free version, and it includes a unique use case marketplace that may help you address a specific challenge, such as phishing or ransomware. But it also comes predefined with required playbooks and integrations, simulation data, and no joke, it can be deployed with just a few clicks. So, and then within the community, you can also schedule private sessions with one of the Siemplify senior architects and share best practices on overall SOC readiness, use cases, playbooks, dashboards, right, and so much more. So as we're going through these kind of turbulent times, this is really a great solution that offers a powerful bridge to maturing your security operations free of charge. And then, of course, we're always here to help as well. So with that, I'll close by saying thank you to the guys from Stage 2, along with everyone else who joined. Please stay safe.
Thanks, guys, and feel free to reach out.
Thanks, everyone.